Welcome to the Unscripted Authentic Leadership Podcast, a podcast we are seeking to lead change while also seeking to understand. We are also here as a platform for leaders to come together to unite, to develop, and empower other leaders in the areas of business, family, faith, and community. I'm your host, Lafayette Lane, joined by my co-host, John LeBron. And today we are joined by our special guest, Jesus Eddie Campa. Put those clap emojis in the comment section, put those hands together. Make Jesus feel real comfortable right here on the Unscripted Podcast. He has joined us to have an incredible conversation around the current state of law enforcement. Just a little bit about our special guest, Eddie. He is a retired chief of police and current CEO of Leading Through Adversity and AB Strategic Group CEO, Jesus Eddie Campa. Let's get right into the conversation. We're so excited to have you again, Jesus. Just kicking this topic off. This is a very sensitive topic. It is a relevant topic. It's a topic that some are afraid to have, but we are here at Unscripted. We're not afraid to have those tough, hard conversations. And so I want to kick it off by asking you, Eddie, what are some of the barriers to good police community relations between the police and specifically not just the community, but between the police and minorities, and what strategies can be taken to eliminate those?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on the show. And, you bring up a very touchy subject for a lot of law enforcement people. And this is, this is something that I'm not afraid to talk about. This is something that I've been talking about since I began my career in 1994. The lack of communication, the lack of empathy, the lack of wanting to get to know each other. The lack of procedural justice is one of the things that is causing the current rift that we're in. There's several things that law enforcement hates. They hate the way things are, and they hate change. So everything just stays the same. So I think that what we really need to do is we really need to sit down and come to communication. And if anybody's familiar with procedural justice in 21st century policing, that's basically what it calls for. And it's funny because people always ask me, well, what's procedural justice? I don't understand what that is. And it's like, well, simply put, it's the golden rule. The golden rule of procedural justice is treat others the way you want to be treated, and it's that simple, and it's almost kind of laughable when people can't just see how easy this would be. Of course, you can't just blame everything on law enforcement. 99% of us are good guys. 99% of us are trying to do the right thing. It's unfortunate that squeaky wheel gets the oil, but that 99% is out there actually trying to do a good job. So I just think we gotta sit down at the table, communicate, learn a little bit about empathy, and not be afraid of learning to know about each other's the different ethnic groups and races.
Yeah, I love that response. You said one word that stuck out to me in your response. You said change, and that's a word that scares a lot of people. And because of that fear, it brings unnecessary violence. It brings unnecessary things that occur because we have differences, and it's about making those differences. Not making them where they pull us apart, but our differences that unify us and bring us together.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So, one of the things that I did when I was the chief of police in East Texas, I created a program called No Colors, No Labels. It was a No Colors, No Labels initiative. And that initiative was designed to remove the preconceived notion that the community had that the police were racially motivated. And one of the things that we did is we created, I had a monthly cultural awareness meal. And every month we highlighted a particular race that made up our community, And so, like, for instance, the very first one was on the Hispanic heritage. And we had, your traditional Mexican food. We brought in the experts to talk about the Mexican culture and educate people. And as the program went on, and it went on for 12 months, highlighting every race that we had within our community, we started seeing people come together because they were no longer afraid of the differences. Because they understood the differences.
Powerful.
And what they understood was that we had more in common than we did than we were any different. Yeah. So if people were just to take the time to get to know one another and understand the cultures and the differences and the beliefs, they'll see that they all actually align, maybe a little bit differently, but they all align and we can solve a lot of the problems that way.
Sure. Speaking of that, do you think the racial makeup of a community's police department should be similar to the racial makeup of the community it serves? Or do you think
Absolutely.
this is unnecessary?
Oh no, absolutely. I've always been a proponent of the workforce should mirror the community that you're serving. Okay,
Okay.
when you have it is hard to do when you have a very diverse community. I mean, because it's going to be very hard. If you've got, for instance, Houston Community College, their Houston Community College has over 200 countries that attend community college in Houston. Now they only have 79 police officers on their police department. It's going to be kind of hard to get somebody to represent all those 200 on the police department.
Sure.
But that's where the racial empathy and understanding comes into place. Cultural awareness is very important.
Yeah, you're talking about that cultural awareness. We had a series back when we first started our podcast. We had a bias series. We talked about the different unconscious biases: gender bias, name biases, racial bias. Do you think that because research has shown that unconscious racial bias often impacts human behavior, as you've already alluded to, what can law enforcement do in terms of training, educating, or cultivating an internal culture to combat the effect of unconscious racial bias so that it does not affect how police enforce the law?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question and a very loaded one because it's my opinion that I believe that we, as law enforcement, we really need to go back and retrace our hiring practices, and it goes all the way to retracing our hiring practices, retracing the level of education that a new officer has when they come out onto the field.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we all have biases. Okay, everybody. I mean, I always laugh when people say I'm not biased. Really? Okay,
Yeah.
well, I know for a fact you don't like McDonald's, so you're biased against McDonald's. I mean, it's as silly as that.
It's true.
But everybody has some sort of bias. But I
Yes.
really do think that what we need to do in the law enforcement field is actually go back and retrace our hiring practices
Mm.
and go back to our selection process, do spend more time concentrating on oh my god, on a person's understanding of different cultures, and that the relationship is there and that they're right for this position. And we have to concentrate more on learning how to de-escalate situations as opposed to escalating the situations.
Sure.
Mm.
You talked about those hiring practices. Sometimes, from the outside looking in, we're trying to figure out as a community and the minority community, how did this officer even get hired on? Because of the actions that they took were so irresponsible. It just seemed like they were just acting rogue, or they just didn't have any prior training. What is the hiring process of when you go to be a police officer?
Well, and another hard question because there are very good hiring practices. I mean, you have to fill out an application, you have to do a psychological examination, you go through a
I,
background check, you go through an oral board interview, and then you spend 6 months, 7 months in a police academy training you to all these things, right? But I think that right now most police agencies, you have to be 21 years of age to become a police officer. A lot of agencies do not require a college degree, and I'm not saying that a college degree is required for the job. What I'm saying is that, you know, and no offense to anybody that works at McDonald's, but today I'm working at McDonald's on my 20th birthday. I turn 21 tomorrow, and on Tuesday I start the police academy, and I get 6 months worth of training, and I'm out on the street for
mm,
another 4 or 5 months with an FTO, and then I'm free to arrest uh, if I have to take human life, resist you from your freedoms. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't trust a heart surgeon operating on my heart if he'd only have had a year worth of experience and training, you know. So I think that we really need to spend more time on our training in law enforcement. But unfortunately, the people that hold the purse strings, which are city councils or county commissioners or whatever, every time there's a budget cut, the first thing they do is cut police training, which is the most important thing, you know. So how do we change that is we have to have people in power that understand the importance of training and education, you know, because that's a better trained officer, a better educated officer is going to make better decisions and watch out what he's saying and what he's doing. And we should be able to prevent having any of those racial issues once we're out on the field.
Do you think it would help if they delayed? So when I was 20, 21, 22, obviously I was way less mature than now. And, you know, I was probably a relatively mature 21-year-old compared to some friends. But still, let's be honest, you're 21. So, but as a 28-year-old, you're definitely more mature than 21, 38. And I understand you can't wait till someone's 40 to let them finally, you know, start to patrol. But would it be advantageous then to almost increase the age to 25 or something?
Well, you know,
it's a lot of responsibility for a 21-year-old.
It is, but then the argument comes out, well, you know, we're sending 18-year-olds to the military to fight a war. That's a lot of responsibility. So you can never, that's the problem is we're never going to find that right answer because everything contradicts everything. You know, you're 18 years of age, you're good enough to go serve our country and fight a war. But at 18, you can't be a police officer in your own community to help your community. At 18 years of age, you can go to war, but you're not old enough to drink. It's like, so everything just contradicts everything. There's no standard, you know. So to say it would be advantageous to let somebody, you know, maybe at 25 or at 28 years of age, goes back to the training portion, you know, maybe. And I know as a police chief and as a state director, I know how hard it is for us to recruit people. Okay. It's very hard for us to recruit people, especially now. Nobody wants to do this job. You know, police chiefs, their tenure is anywhere between 1 to 2 years right now. You know, because we're in a cancel culture. The police chief is running a good agency, but the mistake of one officer will cost that chief his job. Might not cost the officer his job, but it'll cost the chief his job. So maybe through prolonging it, saying like, and I don't want to say that you need a college degree. I'm just saying that we need some more training. Maybe, you know, maybe
the degree would definitely make you have to go through a process. It's just age, to be quite honest.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, a lot of kids, you know, so like my kid, he's going to be graduating high school at 17. Yeah. So, you know, if he did a traditional track in 4 years, he would be 21 by the time he came out. Now, we would anticipate and hope that if you got through college, it's because you're disciplined.
Yes.
You're trained, you're a little bit mature, you know how to handle your things. And that may transition over to the law enforcement side, right? Yeah. But what I'm saying is that I think that once a law enforcement, you know, even an electrician has to go through apprentices. I mean, he goes to a technical school, he graduates with his license, but then he becomes an apprentice, a journeyman or whatever they are. But there's like all these different levels before he's actually cut out on his own. We need to find something like that for law enforcement, you know, and you know, I'm 48 years old now. If we were having this conversation when I was 21, I tell you that this old man here is insane. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Sure.
But you look at things differently.
So there's a man named Jocko Willink, if you're familiar with him. He talks about extreme ownership, and he has his shows and so forth. But I heard him comment on a short film about how much, you mentioned the military, but he had talked about how much training they go through. Not just the 6 to 9 to 12 months of training before they go to a field, but then the continual training all the time. He basically said 75% of what we do is train for 25% of the actual work. He said, if we could just give the law enforcement 25% of what they do is training, I think he said he thinks it would completely flip or would help immensely a lot of the issues. And it would show people, hey, we train like crazy. I don't know. How do you...
No, I mean, I totally agree with that comment. I did see that short film where he talks about that.
Yeah.
The
And my
unfortunate,
percentages could be slightly off, but that was basically what he's saying.
yeah, I mean, but you're
Yeah.
close. You're close.
Yeah.
And the thing is with that is that, as I said earlier, the problem with that is that every time there's a budget issue,
Mhm.
let's cut the police department, cut,
Mhm.
cut public safety. So as the chief, you look at well, you can't cut personnel because you're already short staffed as it is. You can't cut fuel costs because you need fuel for your cars. You can't cut maintenance costs. You can't do this. Huh. Well, we don't have time to train anyways because we're so busy and short staffed. So cut training more.
Mm.
And we've diluted the amount of training that law enforcement gets that it's ridiculous. It's an investment. It's an investment. I mean, even nowadays, you're looking at colleges, the universities that are putting themselves out of business because they're looking at it as a business. Hey, come get a bachelor's degree for $70,000. Trust me, I know I'm working on a PhD. I graduate next year, and
Congrats.
my return on investment on that is never going to happen. But I'm about $100,000 in the hole by the time it's over.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I maybe should have bought a house because it doesn't make me. Another house or something because there's no return on investment.
Yeah.
So that's what these cities and counties need to do. Is they're spending all this money on lawsuits and complaints and this and that. Is put the money in the training, invest it in the officer that you have, the agency, grow the training, and we'll be better off.
I hear you talking about the training and the resources. There's a whole idea that I've heard and I've seen from different various social groups, such as the Black Lives Matter movement. They are proponing for defund the police. What do you think about that whole idea about defunding the police? Will that help or will that hurt the minority community?
No, all that's going to do is hurt. It's going to make things worse. And here's the thing: is I always laugh because people think that this whole defund the police is new. If you know the history of defunding the police movement, it actually started in the early '60s, and it started up in Chicago with the Black Panthers. There's a matter of fact, there was a movie that came out this year, and I always forget the name of the movie, and I went to go see it, and I was like, "This is an awesome movie for this whole defund the police movement." Chicago at the time was an all Caucasian police department. They were at war with the Black Panthers. They burned down the Black Panthers facility, headquarters. It started this whole defund the police movement. But coming to today, I wish people would use the proper term and say reallocate instead of defund. As a police chief or as a police administrator, I have no problem with you taking things away that do not belong in my wheel well, such as mental health issues. I mean, I have to be trained on how to deal with them. But hey, I barely got trained on law enforcement. You gave me 6 months. Now you want me to be an expert, a psychologist, psychiatrist. You want me to be a priest. You want me to be a doctor. You want me to be a nurse. You want me to be a teacher, a father, a brother, an uncle. You want me to be all of these things, but you don't give me the tools to do it. So, for instance, if you take NYPD, they took, I think, a big chunk. LAPD took a big chunk from there. But if you actually look, it was a reallocation of funds. It wasn't a defunding. So they took the mental health services away from the police department and put it in a different aisle in the city budget. They just took that money and reallocated it. So there's really no defunding. But when you come in and if you're going to talk about defunding and you're starting to hurt the training, the number of officers we can hire, then there's no place for that. A lawless society is an anarchist society, and we're a nation of laws and rules, and I think mankind in any nation has to have rules and guidelines, and you have to have guardians to be able to keep that. And I think that that's what law enforcement should be looked at as guardians and not as this law enforcement. We're here to protect and make sure that everybody is equally protected and served. And the key word there is equally. And I think that's one of the major things that's missing in law enforcement is that while we may be equal, but are we all valued at the same equity level? Do we all have the same equity? And right now we don't. So with the proper training, education, resources, you'll be able to balance it out, and you'll have true justice, just the way Lady Justice is supposed to be.
Sure. You
So
talk
how do you
about.
get to that
Go ahead.
same I'm sorry. How
Go
do you
ahead.
get to that same equity that you mentioned about? Like, can you expand on that at all? That's
Yeah.
super interesting to me. I'm trying to visualize how that I get what you're saying. Um, but I'm trying to visualize how that is. How do you implement that? How do you put structures in for that?
Well, one of the places that we start is the first thing everybody wants to do is blame the police, right? Well, let's put blame where it really lies. We are unfortunately a nation of systems, and a lot of our systems are broken. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we want to get true equity, we need to get to the root of the problem. And it's not the police department, and it's not the citizens. You know, we have a government that's up here that has fractured all of these systems, and we're the recipients of, as they say, what rolls downhill, right? So now we got to take all those systems and align them to where everybody is valued in an equal manner. How do we do that? Well, we have to hope that we start electing the right people. We have to start hoping that we can value each other for being human beings and not being a color or not being a difference. I mean, the solutions are there. It's just, how do we get there? How do we end racism? Well, we've been trying to end racism forever. We can't seem to do that. But is it an issue of race, or is it an issue of equality? I mean, everybody has the same opportunity, but is it equal? There's this commercial that I saw the other day, or not a commercial, a TikTok thing that I saw the other day, and I was like, and it said something like this. It said, it's a lady saying, a bachelor's degree was viewed highly at one time until people of color started getting them. Now it's not. Any truth to that? I don't know. Or is that propaganda, which is breaking us apart even further? How about we all come together and try to find a systematic solution to where we all are value each other for what we truly are.
Yeah.
But when you have politicians, and I don't want to make this into a political debate, but when you have politicians, most recently our former president, that likes to throw out this rhetoric about division and all of this stuff. I mean, you have the highest authority in our nation saying these things,
Right.
and it's a trickle down effect. And it's like, come on, bro, like let's patch things up. Let's not make things worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to answer your question is, how do you do it? Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I know there's a systematic way of doing it. We all got to come together. We all got to get along. But at the same time, we have to fix our mental health issues. We got to fix our social economic issues. We can no longer have suburbs versus ghettos, suburbs versus downtowns. We have to eliminate all that. And I know somebody's going to say, oh, you're talking about socialism. No, I'm not talking about socialism.
Not at all.
I'm talking about giving everybody the fair share at the same value.
Right.
So, John, I hope I know I didn't answer your question, but I mean, I hope I got a little bit close to answering.
No, you're good. I understand. I was just curious if there was maybe something I didn't know about a possible way to address that equity that you talked about, because I get it. It's just a hard discussion to figure out is my point. It's because there's that line between everybody says, well, you can't just give everybody something, versus some people haven't had a fair shot. Like, people don't actually realize, and I'm a pretty conservative person. I'm a no, my kids don't get any special ribbons or trophies for not winning something kind of guy. But at the same time, people don't understand that some communities were literally built by banks when they were put together. If you research it, people can go research this. It's from John. If you're not looking, I'm about as pasty as it gets. But communities were literally built by banks, with the understanding that, hey, we're going to fund these communities, but this is a white only community. I didn't believe it. I had to do the research. New York was filled with those suburbs where it was like, hey, it wasn't posted, but it was basically understood. And you can find the research like crazy, which wasn't that long ago. It wasn't like this was in the 1800s, which really still isn't that long ago. But people don't understand that's only about 2 generations away as far as family. And so, when you're basically saying, hey, this is a nice place to live, but if you're white, you can stay there. If you're not, too bad. Then that would affect several family generations. Because does that make sense?
Oh no,
And
absolutely.
so these are the
Absolutely.
things I had. And there's other things I can get into. I could talk all day on this, but there's things like that. And I'm big on equality of opportunity, but a lot of people are looking for equality of outcome, which I think is a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
But anyways,
Well,
and so
I'll give you this perfect example. All three of us go to the baseball game, and obviously, if you're not looking, you've got a black man, a brown man, and a white man, right? And
Yeah.
we all go to the baseball game. Now, John, how tall are you?
5'9".
Okay, Lafayette.
6'1".
Okay, well, you said you're 5'10", so I'm 5'9", so I'm the short one here, right?
No, I'm 5'9". Yeah.
Oh, you're 5'9". Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
be 5'8" for the sake of argument.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
the fence happens to be 5'9", and I can't see over it. But
Uh-huh.
hey, it's equal. We're all there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do we have the same equality? You can see the game. I can't.
Yeah.
So all I need is for somebody to give me a small wooden plank that's at least 2 inches tall, so I can see the game. Now we've all got equality, and we're all equal because we're all being the same. So it's not talking about a handout or anything like that. It's just
it's a hand up.
It's a hand up, yeah, leveling the playing field so that we all can, and that's exactly what it is. But what I'm excited about and what I'm seeing that this new generation, like Lafayette's generation that's coming up, is that they see the importance in this. They actually get it,
Right.
and I'm hoping that systematically, through as we old geezers start dying off, and you guys start picking up, that maybe we'll see a revolt. Well, I'm sure I'll never see it, but we'll see a revolt where everybody's treated equally and has the same equity in everything that we do, and that may be the answer.
Yeah, you've talked about those resources. We've been talking about the resources of the police department. One resource that I've seen that has worked when it is working, and what I mean when it is working, I'm referring to body cameras when they are on. What do you think an effective body camera program should look like? Because I've seen some police departments, they're mandating that they have it and make sure that the officers have it on at all time, or have it on when they're interacting with a citizen. And then I've also seen other police departments say they don't have the resources, or some officers have body cameras, and mysteriously when an officer involved shooting is going on, mysteriously the camera just went off. What do you think about effective body camera programs?
Absolutely. So when I at my first police chief job, we didn't have body cameras, and I was the chief who introduced body cameras to the organization.
Good.
And it was a must-have on anytime you're having a communication with a citizen. There was a very clear disciplinary issue if the camera was not turned on when you had an issue. But then you have this beautiful thing called technology that does fail at times. And it just always seems that when you need that body camera the most, it's when it really decides to actually fail. Well, you can only use that excuse so many times, right? Before people don't start to believe it, right? So then it becomes a thing of accountability. And, in a lot of large agencies, it's hard to keep people accountable because you have police unions who reverse decisions and things like this. As a police chief, you wield a lot of power in your organization, but to be quite honest with you, the police unions wield more power than you do. Mm-hmm. So regardless of what your disciplinary matrix says, regardless of what the issues that you stand on are you going to be able to get the proper discipline for that officer violating your policy for your body camera program held accountable? That's where the issue really lies, But I think that very clear policies, camera must be on. The thing that kills law enforcement is the storage, the cloud storage to hold the material. If the camera is cheap, the camera is inexpensive to purchase. It's actually holding the storage of it, that costs a lot of money. And a lot of agencies, especially, 80% of law enforcement agencies across the nation are rural agencies, made up of anywhere between 1 to 12 police officers per agency. They don't have the resources. They don't have the funding to be able to do that. And that's where we see a lot of issues. But I think as long as you have a very clear cut policy that states when those cameras will be on, you have to have a very good maintenance uptake for those cameras to make sure that they're properly working at all times. And and the bad thing about the body cameras, it just depends on what style you have. Because if I'm wearing your traditional body camera that goes here, you know, when if it's an officer involved shooting and I draw my gun, what do you think that camera is going to see? It sees
Just
this.
yeah.
Now I better hope that I have another officer somewhere else that has their camera running, because it's all, unfortunately, we live in a world that loves to believe perception instead of reality.
Sure.
And a lot of the times as a police chief, I've seen body footage that looked like, oh my God, we're going to get sued. We're in the wrong. And then you see a different angle, a different body camera on, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, hold on.
Okay.
Oh,
Sure.
okay. Okay, this makes sense. This is justifiable. So I think that the thing is that people, and I get it, people don't trust the police. I get it. I understand that. It's important for us to earn that trust back. And how do we earn that trust? Is by developing community relations with our community. And what I'm talking about is going out there and meeting the community, talking to the stakeholders, holding your agents, your officers accountable, holding yourself accountable. And if you made a mistake in that agency, you need to come out and just say you made a mistake, own it, and got to earn that trust again.
Yeah.
I hope I answered your question, Lafayette.
No, that was great. We talked about the relationship between the community and the police department. And I believe that we need more representation, more officers on the police task force. But how do we overcome the obstacle of recruiting minority officers when I believe, as a Black male, I personally would never do it. Just because I'm not putting my life in, I have a family, so my hat goes off to police officers. But I think Black men and Black women they're in a conundrum. And I think it's two different things that, well, if I want to be a police officer, I'll be shunned by the Black community because I'm going to go work for the enemy. Or if I go work as a police officer and I speak up, then I'm going against that blue wall I'm supposed to have the band of brothers back in uniform. So how do we break that down for minorities that say, hey, we need you on the police force to bring that diversity, to break down that culture, to better work with the community? We need more minority officers. How do we overcome that challenge of recruiting minority officers to join the police force?
Yeah, and that was something that was hard to do 20 years ago. It's something that's even harder to do today, and that's just to get anybody to do it. Now, when you live in an area, like let's take El Paso, Texas, for an example. Well, the majority of us are Hispanic, so the majority of people you're going to get on your agency are going to be Hispanic officers, right? And I think the way you attract people, the way you attract new recruits, is by showing them that it's not just all about the money. Showing them because that's one of the things that I did. We had a hard time recruiting before I got to that agency.
Yeah.
As we systematically started changing things and we started changing our reputation about being more community oriented, more community service, building programs that serve the community, like No Colors, No Labels, the Cool Cops ice cream truck. And I built a relationship and a partnership with Blue Bell Ice Cream. We created an ice cream truck out of a police truck, and we would go around handing out ice cream. And people started seeing that we were putting them first, and automatically people were attracted to that. And more Hispanics, more African Americans and Oriental people started joining the agency just because of the actions they were seeing us do, the positive impact. What a lot of police chiefs don't want to do is they don't want to do the work. This requires work.
Sure.
So the only way you're going to do that is by going out and building these relationships and talking to the minorities and trying to convince them that you need them to better your organization. And it does help, especially when they see it as an action and not just words.
So I have a relatively recent new perspective because we have a client for one of my company, for my family's company, who has that hired us. I can't mention who they are, but it was
Right.
a police department here in Ohio. And basically, the mayor had said, "Hey, I think we have a toxic environment. Can you guys come in and look and just get it? Just is it me? Am I making this up? I don't know. We've had too many officers leave, and I need to understand what's going on. Like good officers, they don't care if so much of the bad ones leave. But he said we've had some stellar ones go to another place that pays less and is more dangerous. So, like okay, so we came in and." There's a report that people can Google the company name. It'll show up in Google. Apparently, it has my name or our name all over it. But because we didn't know that it's a part. Apparently, when we write a report for the Department of the City, it's a public thing.
document.
So yeah, didn't know that. But anyways, so fast forward. We were all in the news for a little while, but it was a little town, so nobody watches their news. But what we found though was the chief. Didn't expect this, was a large problem within the culture of the police department, and it was causing a lot of stress on a lot of the officers. Now, unfortunately, there was no issues at this place with some of the mainstream things we see in the media with police departments and different cultures and so forth. That has not been an issue that we've seen in this department, and they seem to have a good relationship with the community. But what I did notice was they had a hard time recruiting other good officers because other departments would almost say, hey, you guys should stay away from such and such police department because that chief over there is ridiculous and you don't want to work for him. It's toxic. Don't go. And so community, great. The guys on the within the department, the officers, the sergeants, and so forth, great. I met almost every single one of them. But it was the chief that seemed to be causing the issue. Now they're going through a whole thing still because, it's not that easy to just get rid of somebody. But
it's very easy to get rid of the chief.
Well, there's still a process. There's still a process to that. He works for the city, so they're not part of the police union, which most people don't realize. At least in this situation, it's not. But so yes, they're going through a process with that. But when you said they can't hire, or people have a hard time hiring, and then you mentioned that a lot of chiefs don't want to do the work, is it possible that there's also an issue then of leadership within a lot of departments that can maybe causing some of the issues with hiring quality individuals or causing extra stress on officers and so forth because they've got to deal with their families, so forth.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, you had a police chief just recently, and I think it was in Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
who he's a police chief and went out and printed out some KKK,
The swastika
and stuff to put them on the.
I'm pretty sure it's here in
raincoats.
Ohio. Yeah.
Was it Ohio? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So it's yeah. I mean, a lot of police chiefs are the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to give you an example. That community that I took over in East Texas, I was brought in as a change agent. I was brought in as the first minority police chief to change the culture of that organization. Some of the officers in the organization wanted to change. The majority of them didn't want it, because, and then as we painted a picture and started doing things and the image started to change, it looked like everything was great on the outside, but internally we had a fight I mean, they didn't want the change. They didn't want the direction we were going into. They didn't want to be held accountable. They didn't want more minorities. They're like, this is, we're historically, this is the way we are. This is the way it's going to be. We're not going to take orders from a spick like you. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. And as we started bringing in younger and different minority police officers to come in, the officers internally were doing everything they could to get rid of them and make their lives, because they were so toxic. So here the role was reversed. You had a chief, like, which was me, which wanted to make the change. You had city council that wanted to change. You had the community that wanted to change. But I had 60 somewhat officers that refused to budge.
It's a lot.
So the toxicity comes internally. It can come from leadership, because when I was there, before I got there, that behavior was tolerated. That behavior was okay. It's okay to do that. It's okay. We don't need body cameras. We don't need this. We don't need rules. They didn't even have an internal affairs division. We don't need this. We don't need that. I will tell you that if you wanted to file a complaint against a police officer, you had to fill out, and I'm not kidding, a 12-page document to file a complaint on an officer. And it's also, if you wanted to file a compliment on the officer, you had to fill out this 12-page report. When I got there, I turned it into a 1-page 3x4 card to file a complaint or a compliment. Made it very simple. That was it. Also, like I said, with the change of leadership, when I left, I had that department fully staffed. First time in the history of the agency ever fully staffed. So yeah, to answer your question, I mean, it comes from all levels. It starts with the leadership, but sometimes the leadership is trying to do the right thing, but it's the people that are following that don't want the right thing. So it makes the leader's job almost impossible.
And then you got unions, so you can't necessarily make changes like you need.
Yep.
So basically, it's a whole systematic issue.
Yeah, and you see, the chief the chiefs were never represented by unions.
Yeah,
we may have a contract, but most police chief contracts, there's usually an out clause for the city that says, as long as we both agree, and they may be a severance package. Goodbye. Don't say anything bad about us. We won't say anything bad about you. Get the hell out. And and in my case, I had about 60 police officers that wanted my head, and I mean, even if I breathed, they were filing a complaint against me. I'm like, okay, and it was all very simple, just because the color of my skin and because I was trying to bring unity and equality to everybody. And it is what it is. I said, you know what? I've done everything that I can. I was named the 2017 Humanitarian of the Year by the NAACP. So I know I did my job. I did what I had to do. But you know what? I can't do this anymore. So we bounced,
Yeah.
I have an interesting question. What would you say to those who say recreational drugs should be legalized to reduce drug-related crimes, especially to those states that have legalized marijuana, weed, or the states have legalized medicinal marijuana, yet you still have people that are in jail, have been in jail for years in those states that have not been legalized. They're still in jail in a state that has been legalized, that same drug they went to jail for. So what would you say to those people that are campaigning for recreational drugs to be legalized to reduce drug-related crimes?
Well, man, you put me on the spot, didn't you? So my professional opinion on that is, when I was younger, I wanted everybody locked up. You had one joint, one gram of 1 ounce or whatever of marijuana, you had to go to jail. As I got older and I started realizing things, you can actually ruin a person's life. One joint, they can never qualify for financial aid, and they become the system, and then that's the gateway drug that took them down a spiral. But it really wasn't the drug, because they don't smoke drugs, they don't do drugs anymore. But now they're in the system, and they can't be part of anything else, right? So I agree on the medicinal purposes. If you can find, like, we'll use marijuana. Marijuana, it's good for arthritis. It's good for that. So they say. I don't know. Okay, there's a medical there's research. There's this and that. Okay, legalize it, and you know what? Let's cut out the jail time for a lot of these drugs. I mean, you got people. I mean, but where do you draw the line? It's like, well, what's recreational? Is heroin recreational? I mean, is there some kind of medicinal purpose? I guess you could say there is, because heroin is kind of a subcommittee of morphine, so it could help with pain because it just numbs you, right? So I mean, I don't know, where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
But I do think that maybe we should decriminalize a lot of the drugs. Not when I say a lot, I don't mean a lot. For me, when I'm talking about marijuana,
That's what I'm. Yeah.
I mean, I think you should decriminalize it, and anybody that did not commit a violent offense, and that's an assault, a sexual assault, or anything like that. If you committed it while you were intoxicated under the influence, and you need to stay in jail. But if you were walking down the street, us three are walking down the street, and the cops pull us over for whatever reason because we look suspicious because, why are two men of color hanging out with this white guy? What's going on here? And you pat
It's a
us
weird
down.
looking group.
Yeah, and you find different age groups here. One's 37, one's 48, one's 27. What the hell? So you find marijuana, and it's like, well, you know what? Okay, slap on the wrist, go on your merry way.
Sure.
10 years ago, if that happened, they'll lock us up for 5-10 years just for walking down the street with joints in our pocket.
They do this in LA. I grew up Southern California, and when I was a young kid, there was the crack epidemic. And I understand how that drug alone just killed families, because you're talking mothers and so forth went from working to not making any money, and now kids are figuring out, how do I survive? But on the same time, they got the solution to that was the 3-strike rule, where basically, if you got caught, you get life in prison essentially, or something close to it. Nearly impossible to get out. And I would almost argue that just escalated the issue to another level, versus, what I'm saying?
Right.
And then how do you recover from that as a community? I mean, come on.
Well, you see, and that just goes back to the earlier conversation about equality. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where's the equality in that? There isn't any, because look, we all know the reason crack was created was because it was, traditionally supposed to be a poor man's cocaine. Okay? That's what it was for. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, who's the majority of the poor men? Minorities, right? And it was supposed to impact the African American community way more. The history of Chicago and LA. I mean, it's all there. It's there. And then you go to LA, you create the 3 strikes rule. Well, who's the majority of the people that are getting life sentences? Minorities. So you've totally disproportionized this whole equality thing, and it's not working. So and I'll be honest with you, back in the day when it passed, I was like, yeah, we need that in Texas. We need that in Texas. And now I'm like, oh my God, no, that's the stupidest thing ever,
Right.
Yeah, because we look at it with a basically lack of empathy, because I would have been the same way, like, you took the drug, right? But at the same time, to understand the situation, right? I'm not saying someone's innocent because they took it. I'm not saying that. But at the same time, you're making the issue worse by stripping everybody out of a family forever. And now you're putting kids into another system, whether it's a foster system or whatever. So it's not a solution, is my point. It's just it's not even a Band-Aid. I don't even know what you would call that, but
no, and that's what I'm saying. It just boils down to a lot of systems being broken. I mean, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, cocaine used to be a rich man's drug, back in the 80s when it first popped out, in the 70s, it was a rich man's drug. So how can you say drugs are a poor man's problem? As well, it's not. It's an everybody problem. Right. But how do we, how do we stop the drug? How do we stop the use of drugs when the United States is the #1 consumer of illegal drugs?
And then I would wonder, would they make the same 3 strikes rule with the opiates, right? We live in Dayton, Ohio. It's like the capital. I mean, trafficking and the opiate crisis. It's terrible. Narcan is being used every hour. It's terrible. But I've only pretty much heard of white guys and women who have been having these OD issues. I could be wrong. I haven't actually looked at the statistics, but as far as I can tell from all the stories I hear, it's primarily white. So would we have made the same 3 strikes rule in that, right? I don't know. I doubt it, but
well, without making this a racial issue, I mean, let's look at it. Let's look at it this way. Would they have issued the 3 strike rule? Never. Would they right now? the opiates, it's an epidemic. It's a
Oh, it's
pandemic.
bad. It's terrible.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
Crack cocaine. Oh, lock those guys up. 3 strikes, send them up. Lock them up a hill.
Yeah.
Well, why? Because they're minorities. Could get rid of them.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what I'm talking about. It's like, look,
Yeah.
the opiate crisis, the crack crisis, it's all a crisis. Drugs, it doesn't matter what it is. It shouldn't be decided on color, shouldn't be decided on race. It's an everybody problem. It's a human being problem. Mm-hmm. So how do we fix it? And we need to attack it in the same way. All of them, why are they offering, why is Narcan available for opiates and why is treatment centers being open for the opiate crisis, but nothing for the crack and the heroin and anything else?
One goes to jail, the other goes to rehab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that was kind of my point. Was they're hammering Narcan because people always ask me, "What's your opinion on Narcan?" Because we're just giving out to people who just want to die. I'm like, well, they don't necessarily want to die. They have an issue and they have no idea how to fix it.
Well, you see, and in that back up, drug issue is usually connected to some kind of mental illness. Mm-hmm. It may be connected to some kind of other, work-related injury, and you got hooked on them. But the majority of the time, we have to really concentrate on mental health. Everybody suffers from mental health issues. I know every morning, I struggle from mental health issues every other hour because something's just like, oh my God, and we just handle it differently, but we need to start paying more attention to mental health.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And all of these things can be summed up into one word: adversity.
Yeah. And how do you overcome it?
How do you overcome that? You created a leadership development program talking about leading through adversity. Mm-hmm. Tell our audience what that is. Why did you come up with it, and how is it helping leaders overcome the adversities in their life?
Yeah, so I created Leading Through Adversity based out of my experience in East Texas. Here we had this great thing going. I'm thinking to myself, how the hell is everything so right and everything is so wrong? Mm-hmm. It's like, how I'm the police chief. I'm one of these guys. How come I can't get them to follow? And I had nobody to talk to. I had nobody to, I couldn't go talk to the mayor. I couldn't go talk to city council. I couldn't talk to the officers because they couldn't stand me. I couldn't go talk to my wife because she didn't understand it. I was kind of alone. So after I left, I said, you know what? There's got to be something. So I came up with Leading Through Adversity. And, I sent out some feelers through my network, just to other police chiefs and saying, look, hey, man, if you're ever in any type of situation where you just need to talk and you feel like you're alone and you have nobody there in your corner, pick up the phone. And that's how it started. I started having police chiefs call me and like, hey, man, we heard that you went through this. I'm going through this. How do I fix it? So before you knew it, it started picking up some steam. And then I started putting some leadership development courses on how to deal with the adversity of dealing with the unknown and dealing with issues that you may be confronted with. And, or created some new programs for new leaders, because when you become a leader, everybody tells you how wonderful and great things are going to be, but they always forget to tell you all the headaches that come with it. Like all of a sudden you may become the most popular guy in the world because of what you can do for me, and not because of you're a great leader, but I'm going to see how much I can milk out of you. Right. So we created leadership development courses. And now, we started off with 5 non-paying clients. Now we're at 38 paying clients, and they include chiefs of police, CEOs, school superintendents, and it's all over the nation. And we're picking up some really good momentum.
That's great.
I mean, we just did something in Phoenix, in the Phoenix, Arizona area, where this one police chief had an idea, but he knew he wasn't going to be able to sell it to his officers. So we went down there as a consulting firm and pitched the idea for him, and the officers thought it was a greatest thing ever. But we didn't come up with it. We just did the pitch. It was his idea. But had they known it was his idea, they would have hung him, So that's kind of what we do. And then, we're doing some executive searches now and hopefully trying to help agencies and communities pick that right police chief that's going to take them to their next, to where we need to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure.
So that's what Leading Through Adversity is all about.
Awesome. Those of you that are watching, listen to this, purchase Eddie's book, Unmasking Leadership, What They Don't Tell You. and sign up for those leadership development programs through Leading Through Adversity. The program name is Leading Through Adversity. We also want you to connect and follow Eddie on social media. You can connect with him on his website, Jesus Eddie Campa.com. Those of you that are listening, JesusEddieCampa.com is his website. His Instagram handle is @leading_through_adversity. He's also, you can find him on LinkedIn, Jesus Eddie Campa, and on Facebook, Jesus Eddie Campa. Also, stay connected with us here on social media, on our various social media platforms. Unscripted Authentic Leadership Podcast on Facebook, our Instagram handle @Unscripted Leadership. You also can find us on LinkedIn on Unscripted Authentic Leadership Podcast. You can stream this episode and all of our 49 other episodes of our podcast on any podcast platform from Apple to Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, so forth. Connect with us on our website, unscripted-leadership.com, where you can sign up for one of our mastermind groups. You can go there and find out more information about that. You also can find some merch there on our website there. When you sign up for our unscripted email group, you will receive a 10% off merch code. This has been another amazing episode of the Unscripted Authentic Leadership Podcast. Again, thank you to our special guest, Eddie, for all of the great information that he shared. Someone will be developed and better empowered by that information. We thank you for tuning in again. We pray that you be the leader that God has called you to be. As always, we're here to build bridges and not walls. Bridges connect and walls divide. Until next time, God bless you.